That evening, the saloon was loud. Piano jangling, cards slapping, laughter rolling through clouds of smoke. Among the crowd sat the familiar faces of ranch hands spending their pay, a few traveling merchants, and in his corner, Luther Kane. Kane owned the Velvet Slipper, the only gambling house in town. He was a man whose smile never reached his eyes. They were cold and cruel, always calculating. He watched Marianne as one might study a horse before the bidding started. His gaze made her skin crawl. Then the room changed, the swinging doors opened, and silence followed. Jack Rowland had entered. At 34, Jack was the richest man in 3 counties and the most respected. He owned the Rowland Ranch, a vast empire of grass and cattle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his skin sun-browned and marked by years of hard work. His dark hair curled beneath the brim of his hat, and his blue eyes missed nothing. He carried himself with quiet authority, a man who didn't need to prove his power. The stories said he was hard but fair, a widower who'd buried both wife and child to fever years before. Jack nodded once to Sheriff Boyd, then took a seat at a small table in the corner. He didn't speak much, only ordered whiskey and water in that low, steady voice that made the room somehow quieter. Marianne's heart thudded as she carried the tray to his table. She'd served hundreds of men, but none like him. "Mr. Rowland," she said softly, "what can I get for you?" He looked up. His eyes met hers, sharp and clear. For a second, she felt stripped of every mask she'd ever worn. "Whiskey," he said. "And a glass of water, if you please." She nodded quickly, turning away before he could see the flush rise in her cheeks. The other women in the saloon watched with narrowed eyes, some jealous, some curious. When she set the drinks before him, his gaze lingered. "That'll be all, sir?" she asked. "For now." Something unspoken passed between them, brief, electric, and then he looked away. She returned to her work, but her hands trembled. It began with laughter. 3 drovers, drunk on cheap whiskey, cornered her near the bar. One, a heavy man with a greasy beard, blocked her path. "Well now," he drawled, "ain't you a pretty little thing? Come sit with us." "I've work to do, sir," she said firmly. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "Work can wait." "We're paying customers." The saloon grew quiet. Sheriff Boyd was at the door, back turned. Luther Kane sat watching, amusement curling at his lips. No one moved. Then a voice cut through the silence. She said to let her go. It was Jack Rowland. He hadn't stood yet, but his eyes were cold as winter water. The drover sneered. "This ain't your business, rancher." Jack rose slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floorboards. Every eye followed him. "A man puts his hands on a woman who doesn't want them there," he said calmly. "It becomes the business of every decent man in the room." The tension was a wire ready to snap. The drunk hesitated, saw the calm in Jack's face, and the steady hand that rested near his hip. With a grunt, he shoved Marianne away. "She ain't worth the trouble anyway." Jack's eyes flicked to her. She stumbled, caught herself, and then he was beside her, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. "You all right, miss?" She nodded, trembling. "Yes, sir, thank you." He gave a short nod, set a coin on the table, and walked out. The door swung closed behind him, and whispers exploded. "Did you see that?" "Rowland stood up for her. Guess she's caught herself a rich one." Luther Kane's voice slithered through the room. "Careful, my dear," he said as she passed. "Wouldn't want to give a man like Mr. Rowland the wrong idea." Marianne finished her shift with her head high, but her heart shook. Jack Rowland had looked at her once, and in doing so had changed everything. By dawn, Dustwood was buzzing. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. She was no longer the nameless saloon girl. She was Jack Rowland's interest, the poor orphan and the richest man in Texas. And in a town built on dust, rumor was wildfire. Every woman scowled when she walked by. Every man looked at her as if she'd been claimed. The shame burned hotter than any fever. Then, 1 week later, he returned. It was a quiet afternoon when the saloon doors creaked open and Jack Rowland stepped inside again. He looked every inch the legend, dust on his boots, purpose in his stride. He went straight to the bar. "Silas," he said, "I'm here for Miss Collins." The owner blinked, confused. "For Marianne?" Jack's gaze found her. "I need someone to manage my house and kitchen. Proper work, proper wages." The saloon froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears. He was offering her escape, but walking out with him would prove every rumor true. "What do you say, Miss Collins?" he asked quietly. "The work is hard. The pay is fair. And you won't be bothered." Her breath caught. She looked around. The smirks, the stares, and knew she couldn't live like this anymore. "I accept," she whispered. Jack nodded once. "Get your things. We leave in an hour." As she packed her small bundle and stepped out into the harsh Texas light, the town gathered to watch. Eleanor Kane, the gambler's wife, stood at the front, her voice dripping poison. "A respectable job as a bachelor's housekeeper? My dear, we all know what that means." Marianne stopped, trembling. Then she lifted her chin. "I'd rather work for an honest man," she said evenly, "than live off a dishonest one." Gasps followed her words. Eleanor's face blanched red with fury. Jack waited by the wagon, silent but steady. When she reached him, he offered his hand. She took it. As the wagon rolled out of Dustwood, she didn't look back. She didn't know whether she was leaving her past behind or riding straight into her destiny. The road out of Dustwood stretched like a faded ribbon through the wild Texas plain. The sun burned low, painting the world in copper and gold. Marianne sat beside Jack on the wagon seat, her bundle in her lap, her hands clenched tight. The only sound was the creak of the wheels and the soft jingle of the horses. Tack. She stole small glances at him, trying to read the man who'd turned her life upside down. His face was set, his eyes on the horizon. He hadn't said more than a few words since they left town, yet she could feel the quiet power in him. Not the kind that demanded, but the kind that simply was. When the Roland Ranch came into view, she felt her breath catch. It was a fortress built against loneliness, a large, stone house surrounded by miles of silent land. The place felt empty, stripped bare of laughter. "This is your home," Jack said as they pulled up near the porch. "And now yours too, Miss Collins." She followed him inside. The house was spotless but cold. No family pictures, no trinkets, no warmth. Only the smell of leather, smoke, and silence. "You'll find your room down the hall," he said. "Kitchen's yours to manage. I take my coffee early, breakfast before sunrise." "Yes, sir," she murmured. He gave a short nod and disappeared into his study, the heavy door closing behind him. That was how their days began. Jack rose before dawn, rode the fences with his men, and returned after dark covered in dust. Marianne kept to her work, cleaning, cooking, and keeping the big house alive with small touches. A clean tablecloth, a vase of wildflowers, the smell of bread baking. She began to find her rhythm, but the loneliness pressed down hard. He was kind, but distant, polite, but unreachable. Every night she listened for his boots on the porch, hoping he might say more than, "Good evening," or "Thank you for supper." One afternoon, staring out the kitchen window, she noticed a patch of hard, barren earth near the well. To anyone else it was worthless. To her it looked like possibility. She found an old spade in the shed and started digging. The ground fought her, dry and stubborn as stone. Her hands blistered and bled, but she kept at it. Each swing of the spade was a declaration. She would make something live here. Jack watched her from a distance for days, saying nothing. Then one evening, as she struggled with a large rock, his shadow fell across the dirt. "There's an easier way," he said. He took the spade, wedged it under the rock, and levered it free with one clean motion. He tossed it aside and studied her. "What are you trying to do, Miss Collins?" "I'm making a garden," she said, breathless. "The land looks dead, but I don't believe it is. It just needs care." His gaze lingered on her face, flushed, determined, streaked with dirt, and something in his expression softened. "My wife," he said quietly. "She used to have a garden over on the far side, could grow roses and dust." It was the first time he had ever spoken of her. Marianne didn't move. afraid to break the moment. He looked toward the empty horizon, voice low and heavy. After they were gone, I tore it all out, couldn't stand to see it. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, but the wall between them had cracked. After that, small changes came. He began leaving things near her garden. A sack of seed, a strip of canvas for shade, a bucket of water from the creek. No words, just quiet help. She, in turn, began leaving fresh bread by his study door, coffee ready when he came in from the range. By midsummer, green shoots were pushing through the soil. Her garden had come alive, and so, in a way, had the house. One evening, a storm rolled through and left the world washed clean. They sat together on the porch, watching the sky fade to violet. "The garden's coming along," he said. "The soil was better than you thought," she answered with a small smile. He shook his head. "It's not the soil, it's the gardener." Her heart stuttered. She looked down, unsure how to answer. "This is a hard place to be alone," he added after a while. She turned to him, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Is that why you brought me here? Because you were lonely?" He didn't answer at first. Then he said quietly, "I brought you here because what they did to you in town was wrong. And maybe I was tired of ghosts." The way he said it, plain and raw, broke something inside her. He told her that about Sarah, his wife, and their little boy. The fever that came like a thief and left him hollow. He spoke without tears, his voice like gravel underfoot, every word heavy with memory. She listened, her heart aching for him. For the man who had lost everything and still found the strength to stand. When he finished, silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with a shared understanding. After a long moment, she whispered, "They talk about you in town. They say your heart is stone, but they don't know you." Her voice trembled. "And they talk about me too. They think I came here to sell myself. They don't know that no one ever has. They don't know that." Her voice broke, tears spilling over. "I'm still a virgin." It came out like a cry, raw and trembling, not of shame, but of pain. She covered her face, sobbing quietly, expecting him to recoil or look away. But then she felt it, his hand, large and steady, resting gently on her shoulder. He leaned close, his voice low and firm, like a promise. "Not for long, sweetheart." The words weren't cruel. They were soft, a vow. He wasn't mocking her purity. He was telling her she would never again be unseen, unloved, untouched. That from this moment on she belonged not to the whispers of a cruel town, but to a man who finally saw her. The night air around them felt still and alive all at once. He didn't kiss her. He didn't need to. The promise in his eyes said it all. That night, for the first time, Mary Ann didn't cry herself to sleep. She lay awake, listening to the wind, and thought of a man whose heart had been buried with his family, and of how, against all odds, hers might be the one strong enough to bring it back to life. The days after that night were quiet, but filled with change. Something unspoken had bloomed between them, fragile yet certain, like the first green shoot pushing through hard Texas clay. Jack still worked from dawn to dusk, but now his silences felt different. Not walls, but pauses where words could someday live. And Mary Ann moved through the house with new steadiness. She wasn't the orphan girl anymore, nor the saloon worker whispered about by the town. She was part of something larger, a life being built in the dust. But Dustwood hadn't forgotten her. The rumors had grown sharper. When Jack went into town for supplies, men muttered behind his back. When Mary Ann appeared at the mercantile, women turned away, whispering poison. They called her a kept woman, a bought bride, a sinner hiding behind a rancher's name. And then Luther Kane returned to make those whispers louder. She met him one afternoon when she went into town alone, needing flour and soap. He stood outside the store, his black suit spotless, his smile smooth and cruel. "Miss Collins," he said, tipping his hat. "What a surprise. I heard you've been enjoying country life." "I'm here for supplies," she said evenly, trying to walk past. He blocked her path with practiced charm. "It pains me," seeing such a delicate young lady wasting herself out there. "You're too fine to live in a cowboy's shadow." She held her ground. "I'm not wasting myself, Mr. Kane. I'm working." He chuckled softly. "Working? My dear, the town says otherwise. They say you've become Mr. Rowland's comfort." He leaned closer, his voice low and oily. "A cage is still a cage, even if it's built with gold." She froze, his words sinking deep. Then came his offer. "Marry me. Leave Rowland behind. I could make you respectable again. You'd live in the finest house in Dustwood, not some lonely stone prison." Mary Ann looked at him, really looked, the greed behind his eyes, the hunger for power, not affection. He wanted her only to humiliate Jack, to own what Jack cherished. Her answer came cold and clear. "I'd rather scrub the floors of hell than be your wife." She turned her back and left him standing in the dust. When she told Jack that night, he didn't speak for a long time. His jaw tightened, and something fierce lit in his eyes. "He'll regret saying her name again," he growled. But Kane didn't stop. The next week, his men began striking out at the ranch. Cut fences, missing cattle, a dry water trough. A message written not in ink, but in destruction. Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed the windows, thunder shaking the house. Jack sat by the fire, his rifle near the hearth, staring into the flames. Mary Ann was mending one of his shirts, pretending not to see the worry carved into his face. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air outside. Not thunder, gunfire. Jack was on his feet in an instant. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing the rifle. "Jack, no!" she cried. He looked back once. "Bolt the door behind me." "Don't open it unless I call." Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. Mary Ann waited, heart pounding. The wind howled like a beast outside. Lightning flashed, revealing figures moving near the barn. Kane's men. She prayed, whispering his name. Minutes stretched into hours, until 3 heavy knocks hit the door, their signal. She threw it open. Jack stumbled in, soaked and bleeding from a cut on his arm. "They tried to burn the stable," he said, chest heaving. "Rain stopped it. They'll be back." She tore strips of cloth and cleaned his wound, her hands trembling. "You're freezing," she said. "You need dry clothes." He didn't answer. His blue eyes burned with a fury that scared her and moved her all at once. "You shouldn't have to live like this," he muttered. "And you shouldn't have to fight alone," she whispered back. He looked at her then, and for the first time his guard broke. The weight of everything he'd carried, the grief, the anger, the loneliness, showed in his eyes. "I almost lost you tonight," he said hoarsely. "When they came for the barn, I thought." She touched his face. "You didn't." He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "I can't offer you a name that'll make the town respect you. I can't promise peace, but I can promise truth. I can promise my heart." Her tears fell freely now. "And I can promise mine." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, his voice a whisper. "Then that's enough." Their first kiss was not wild or hurried. It was slow, deep, and full of the promise they'd both waited their whole lives to find. That night, the storm outside raged on, but inside, another storm broke, the one that had been building between them since the moment they met. He held her like something sacred, not a conquest, but a homecoming. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be wanted, truly wanted, not for what she could give, but for who she was. And when morning came, the world smelled of rain and new beginnings, but Kane's rage was not finished. 3 nights later, his men rode again. More of them this time, hired guns with faces she didn't recognize. A young ranch hand rode hard to the house. "They're coming, Mr. Rowland, a dozen of 'em." Jack's voice was steel. "Get the men, barricade the barn, protect the horses." He turned to Mary Ann. "Go inside, bar the doors. Do not open them." She nodded, but her heart said otherwise. When the attack came, it was a thunder of hooves and gunfire. The ranch flared with chaos, bullets cutting through the dark, horses screaming. A fire started in the hay barn, orange flames licking the night. Mary Ann saw the glow from her window and heard the terrified cry of a child. Little Mateo, the ranch hand's son, trapped near the fire. Without thinking, she grabbed a wet cloth, tied it around her mouth, and ran into the storm. The barn was a furnace. Smoke choked the air. She found the boy huddled near the wall, crying. She scooped him into her arms and kicked open the side gate, driving the frightened calves out ahead of her. She burst into the open just as the roof collapsed behind them. When Jack saw her, soot-covered, holding the child, something inside him broke and healed all at once. By dawn, the fight was over. Sheriff Boyd had arrived with a posse, and Kane's hired guns had fled. The barn was gone, but the ranch stood. That morning, Jack walked through the wreckage to where Mary Ann was tending the wounded men. He stopped, watching her, awe written across his face. "You saved them," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "We saved them." He pulled her close, his hand resting at the back of her head. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known." The sheriff rode up, grim and tired. "It's over for now, but Kane won't stop until he's stopped for good." Jack nodded. "Then let's finish it." The next morning, Jack and the sheriff led a posse into Dustwood. Kane was waiting in his gambling hall, smug and certain. The law had finally caught up to him. The gunfight was short and brutal. When the smoke cleared, Kane was in shackles, his empire of lies crumbling around him.